Today, I'm going to talk to you about how to succeed in XR experiences. Specifically, I'll be talking to you about language, critical conversation, and format, and their importance as we move forward in the XR space. I'm Weston. I'm a television comedy writer and award-winning journalist, and award-winning writer-director of The Biz Nest, the world's first 360 VR sitcom, which I will talk a little bit more about shortly. And I'm also an author, professor, and consultant when it comes to immersive storytelling and XR content creation. So here's where we're at, and here's what needs to happen, right? If we want people to be doing XR experiences, well, they need to be hearing about them. And in order for them to be hearing about them, people need to be talking about them. So why aren't people talking about XR more? How do we get people talking about it? And how do we talk about it? So I'll start with that last question. Your fourth grade English teacher had vocabulary for talking about point of view, but she also had a pencil sharpener that would wreak havoc on an Apple pen, right? Not everything from the past applies to the present. We are living in a new world. So the simple designations of first, second, and third person that we use to categorize books, movies, and video games when we talk about them with our friends or colleagues, well, they just don't cover all the options and combinations available in XR. So, like I said, there is some existing vocabulary for point of view, even though it doesn't cover all of what's available in XR. It does provide a great starting point. So just as a quick recap, you're probably familiar with narrative point of view, right? If you tell someone that you read a first-person novel, then they kind of automatically know what you mean, right? They know that the character was telling you their story in the first person using words like I, me, or my, right? And second person is when the book is talking to you, like a choose your own adventure. You walk down the hall and get to a doorway and you have to decide which way to go, right? That's second person. And third person is something like Harry Potter, where the narrator is sort of omniscient and can be inside any character's head or outside, knowing all. And we have equivalents for visual point of view that we use when talking about movies and video games. Most movies are filmed in the third person visual, where we are an outside observer of that world. Some shows that we call meta, right, use second person, where somebody in the show is acknowledging the presence of the audience. The Office does this really well with their documentary style format. And first person is rarely used in films, but you might be familiar with it from video games. That's where we get the term first person shooter, right? You are effectively a character in the game who can take action. So that's what we've got so far. But like I said, that doesn't cover everything that you can do or experience in XR. So I added a couple of categories. These are effectual and experiential point of view. I also added something else, the designation of embodiment. And this speaks specifically to whether the narrative and visual points of view match or are different. I'll speak about that first, and then I'll cover the additional categories. Here's an example. You may have heard of the VR Experience Notes on Blindness. It's an excellent piece. In that piece, you're hearing the first-person narration of John Hull, who was an author going blind. He recorded his experience. Then what happened was VR filmmakers created an approximation of what John Hull would have been seeing. And that's what you're seeing. So in that sense, the visual matches the narrative, right? You're hearing the thoughts in John Hull's head, in your head, and you're seeing an approximation of what John Hull would have seen. So you can conclude that you are meant to be John Hull, right? You are John Hull embodied. So that is an embodied experience in the context of this taxonomy. Now let's compare that to another example, 52 Places to Go, Iceland. This is a piece created by the New York Times, and what we hear is narration from Jada Yuan, 52 Places traveler. She's telling us about her travel experiences. However, at the same time that she's talking about her experiences, we are seeing her. So we figure we can't be meant to be Jada because we're seeing her in the experience with us, even though we are hearing her narration, right? We're hearing stuff coming from her that she isn't saying now in the present as we're looking at her. So in this case, the visual and narrative points of view do not match, and this is a disembodied experience. So now I'll just talk a little bit about the next two categories of immersive point of view, starting with effectual. Effectual point of view speaks to what effect the viewer's presence is having on the scene. So there are three types of effectual point of view: non-entity, entity, and participant. In non-entity effectual point of view, the viewer is an invisible observer, present, but no one can tell. The viewer has no impact. It's as if they're not even there. Now, entity effectual point of view means the viewer is acknowledged and interacted with, but has no agency. The viewer has some impact by virtue of their presence, right? People see you, they may engage with you, but you don't have any agency. And a participant effectual point of view means that the viewer feels like and is somebody who can do things. So you can see already how that covers a lot more than just narrative and visual point of view. We are suddenly able to better describe an XR experience to somebody else. And now that we've finished with effectual point of view, we'll talk about experiential point of view, which again has three subcategories: robot, mortal, and deity. Experiential point of view speaks to what impact you might have as a viewer or player on how you experience the scene. With robot experiential point of view, your experience is programmed. You cannot control it. This would be an experience where you feel like you're moving forward, but you're not doing anything to move yourself forward. Mortal experiential point of view means that you can control your experience much as you would in real life, right? You can look around, and if you're in a 6-DoF experience, one that has 6 degrees of freedom, you can walk forward or backward, side to side, things like this. And deity experiential point of view means that you can view the world as various people or things. You can teleport, you can time travel. Essentially, you can do more than a human could in the actual world, right? You are defying the laws of the physical universe. So now that we know how to talk about XR, how do we get people talking about it? Some people might hypothesize that part of the reason people aren't talking about it is because not everyone's had the opportunity to experience it. But that hasn't stopped us before, right? I always like to think that people were talking about Hamilton who have never been to Broadway. So people don't have to experience something firsthand for it to be part of the cultural conversation, but they do need to hear about it. With this in mind, and a few other things, I co-founded the Look Club. The Look Club is an entry point into immersive narrative with a 1-2 punch of a next level IMDb meets TV guide for immersive narrative content, and a review show that's a Siskel and Ebert for VR with a Tina Fey sensibility. So first, let me talk about how it's sort of a database of content. So if you go to the website, thelook.club, and it's up in beta right now, so you can absolutely go check it out, you'll see that this is a searchable database of immersive narrative content. This is solving the problem that my colleagues and I found because we would hear about amazing immersive narrative, but then we wouldn't know where to go to watch it, right? And it would require several Google searches and reading through potentially outdated reviews from, niche VR publications to try to find out what headsets it's available on, what apps it's available in, all of these things, right? So that's one of the problems that this solves. The other thing it lets you do is, like I said, it's searchable. So you can search by the variables that you would expect to be able to search in a content database, right? Genre, director, but you can also search by platform and operating system, by what kind of headset the experience requires, and you can search by the different categories in the taxonomy. So if you know that you really like doing first-person participant experiences, you can search by that and find a list of immersive narrative experiences that suit your interests. And there are a few more searchable categories that I haven't listed, but I encourage you to head to the website and check it out yourself. I should also mention that you can contribute to the database. So if you have content that you've created or content that you're a big fan of that isn't listed, you can just add it. So there's a little, you'll find a couple of places on the website where you can submit or share your content, and it will bring up a web form and you can just fill in the information, and that will send it over to the Look Club. And there There are human people behind it. So if you have questions, you can reach out and it will be reviewed before it gets posted. So there's no need to fret. But it really, the goal is to share all the amazing work that's being done in immersive narrative with a wider audience and facilitate that cultural conversation. To that end, we also create and produce a review show called The Look Club. In each episode, we discuss one piece of immersive narrative content. We'll introduce it, show a clip so that even without a VR headset, you can get a sense of it. We'll share our reactions to the piece and talk about how the filmmaker's choices were or were not effective, and we'll give a summary review and rating. Part of the value of both the database and the review show is that we learn from the content that came before us, right? So the best directors are encyclopedias of film history. And right now, we don't have that far back to look and learn from. But we do have some content that is being made and it's not as accessible to future creators as it needs to be for us to start to learn from each other. So that's another goal of this project, is to allow that. Even as a pioneer in VR, creating the first 360 VR sitcom, I learned from what came before. I spent a decade working on multi-camera sitcoms, and I spent years seeing immersive theater in Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, and London, cities known for pushing the boundaries in that space. And still, though, there was a lot of room for innovation. When I first learned about VR, all I could think about was how cool it would be if, instead of just watching the television show Friends or The Office, I could be in it, sitting inside the Friends Central Perk Coffee House or in Dunder Mifflin at a desk next to Jim. So that's effectively what I created. The Biz Nest is the world's first 360 VR immersive sitcom, and it's a workplace comedy set in a co-working space where you, the viewer, are a member, surrounded by freelancers and entrepreneurs who are working, socializing, flirting, antagonizing, and navigating the modern work-life balancing act. This series is an enjoyable and award-winning entertainment experience. It's been written about in the Handbook of Research on the Global Impacts and Roles of Immersive Media, and it was the subject of a talk at SIGGRAPH 2020. It also presents a brand new replicable format for storytelling in an immersive medium.
Membership also includes a lunchtime speaker series, happy hours, and unlimited coffee.
Is that all?
No, you also get a Zipcar membership.
Cool. I'll take the...
That's why you asked me into the bathroom?
You should try them on. They're slimming and they won't leak.
I'm getting my things.
free one-day trial.
This clip shows the simul-story approach pioneered by the Biz Nest, which takes the idea of multiple storylines that we find in multi-camera sitcoms and ports it over into the immersive space, where instead of having these storylines run sequentially in time, they are all taking place simultaneously in the same space and sort of taking turns to have your focus at different moments. Another thing that the Biz Nest pioneered is the choose your own attention approach, which rather than asking the question of how do you get the viewer to look where you want as a director, right, takes it as an opportunity and acknowledges that the viewer can and should look wherever they want at any time, and sees the job of the director as providing something interesting and story related for them to discover at any moment. That being said, I use my creativity and vision in the space that I did have control over, and very tightly and carefully choreograph the action happening in the space so that the viewer would always be understanding what's happening in the main storylines, but could also discover additional supplementary and often humorous action as they looked around. Overall, the Biz Nest paves the way for immersive narrative in three main ways: by putting the viewer's experience first, by embracing the fact that there are 360 degrees, and by establishing artistic conventions for immersive storytellers. This includes pioneering new directing techniques, new notation techniques, and new acting techniques specifically geared towards immersive narrative. So now that we've addressed how to talk about XR and how to get people talking about XR, we might ask ourselves, why aren't people talking about it more? Well, they are. More is relative. They are talking about it more than they were a few years ago. And as there starts to be more quality non-gaming content and it begins to be able to reach a wider audience, more people will start talking about XR, and then more people will be doing it. If you're curious to learn more about any of the things I've talked about, you can find more information on my work and about the taxonomy I presented, specifically a longer video that goes into more detail on it, on my website, exalauno.co. If that's too difficult to spell or remember, you can also get to that website by typing in iwantvrcontent.com. And if you're interested in learning more about the Look Club, visit thelook.club, where you can find not only the searchable database and our reviews, but you can search for The Biz Nest and find out where it's currently playing. And if you'd like to speak to me about my work, teaching, or consulting, here's my email address. Feel free to be in touch. I'm also on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for watching and for immersing yourself in my world for a little while.